Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Brussels on a beautiful spring day. So spring is coming, so if anybody wants to grab a seat really quick, we will get going here momentarily. Well, welcome everybody. Again, thank you so much for coming out, taking your time. It just floors me every year to see the amount of people, the interest in coming to see our speakers every year. So thank you for your support and coming out every year. My name is Tim Pryor, along with my wife Donna, own and operate 100-acre grass farm just east of Brussels, and we own and operate. Mainly the girls and guys operate Brussels Egg Service and Cowboy Loft. And it doesn't happen, this evening doesn't happen, or any of the other times you visit, whether it's online, through the phone, or in person, doesn't happen without an amazing staff. So I'd like to introduce them now. Most important, my partner in business and life, my wife Donna. She's back at the back, waving. Trudy Ryan. Oh, Trudy's gone to get something for somebody. Melissa Bellman. Doug Marriott. Calvin Fisher. Cassidy Martin. And Little one. Trevor Elliott. Where's Trevor at the back? Luke McCutcheon. Megan Metzke. Nathan Wilson, Rob Wiltz, Alicia Coltis, Alexa McNeven. Did I forget anybody this year? Whew, that's good. Thank you. Trade show sponsors. Of course, Brussels Egg Service at the back. You'll see our fence crew. We started yesterday fencing, so we're in full swing, and they're just here talking about fence with you guys. Spear Seeds, we have Liz Grass and Brian Van Oistveen. Sorry if I messed that up, Brian. Master Feeds, we have Adam Ray. From Clark Family Farms, Hugh Ross and Jeff Thompson. And from Ontario Soil and Crop, Lois Sinclair. And I really like Lois because Lois gives money. Where is Lois? There's Lois over here. So there was a funding program that was out about a month ago. They haven't done approvals yet. They're looking at them. They say by the end of the month, hopefully. This month, we hope. But anyway, you need a knowledge sharing event. So this event tonight qualifies for a knowledge sharing event. So anybody who's applied, go and see Lois, put your name down so she has track that if you do get approved, doesn't mean you're approved, but if you do get approved, you'll have that portion. You don't need to do another knowledge sharing event. Oh, isn't that embarrassing? Oh, here's your phone. Wow, he does that. Anyway, so Lois from Ontario Soil and Crop. So we've been hosting this spring meeting for the past 37 years. That's a long time, so thank you for your support. There's some of you folks, I've spoken to you tonight, that have been here a long time and keep coming out, and thank you for that. So we'll be hosting an annual Pass Your Walk and Talk, June 3rd this year, so put that in your calendars. If you're registered, we'll send you a reminder. Donna and I also host group tours to other countries. Love touring with like-minded folks around, making their adventure a very memorable experience, making great friends along the way. So here's a few pictures. Won't bore you too. Well, they're not boring. It's pretty fun stuff. Here's a couple of pictures of us in France last summer. Just a few highlights. We'll just carry on. South Africa, there's Joanne and Glenn there, and Sandra in the background. We were to New Zealand a couple years ago. Costa Rica. Scotland. I tell you, you see that fella there that's playing the bagpipes. It was interesting, this fella who was ever on the Scotland adventure with us, it was so cool that this guy was a coach driver. He was a driver, he wore killed every day, and you know, he surprised us one day because we came from lunch and he says, Tim, get everybody to come around this side of the coach and I'll be at the other side. So I got him to come around, came to the other side, and as we came around, he's playing the bagpipes and he's playing Amazing Grace, and I will never forget that experience. And he's just, so I said to him, I got talking to him, I said, what, you know, he played for the army over in Scotland. And I said, what's your most memorable experience? Who have you played for the most? Or not the most memorable. And he says, the Queen. And I says, the Queen, what did she do when you're done? She gave him the nod. He said, there's nothing would beat the nod from the Queen. So that was pretty special. We've been to Ireland. So yeah, it's just, there's Australia, there's Ken. Is Ken in the crowd? Ken, put your hand up. Ken was 70, well no, I won't say how old you were then, but you know, we were there 20 years ago, but no, we weren't, Ken, sorry. Anyway, we've had a lot of great times over the years. I remember somebody told me one time, I just heard it recently, and it says, don't get too old to make another memory. And I think about that when we're on these adventures and the different things that we'll do. We're just creating memories. That's why, you know, Don and I came up with creating memories. And that's what we're trying to do, is make everybody have a great memory, meet some new friends, and see another country along the way. Okay, we just got back from Brazil and looking ahead to England and Wales this summer. Anybody's interested, get a hold of us right away. Looking for one more week and then it's closed up, so need a couple more couples, help us out, and we're going jolly old England, so going some pretty cool experiences there, and yeah, we may even see the king, I don't know, but anyway, there'll be lots of fun, so anybody interested, come and see me for sure. Go to the next slide. Oh, the other slide's on. So we have, yeah, this one. So a young student at the University of Guelph, she got a hold of me and said, Tim, I need some help. I need 50 farms, beef farms, cow-calf operations, to do a study on water. And they've done this study at our farm over the past 4 or 5 years. Doesn't cost you anything. They do all the work and they'll give you the results later. So she has about 40 farms, 45 farms already. So she needs some more. If you're interested, her number's there, or come and see me and I'll get you in touch with her, because it's a fantastic program. I have some notes I'm going to read off she gave me. Her name's Lottie. She works with Dr. Heather Murphy's lab on rotational grazing projects. Lottie, she's just young. She grew up on a dairy farm in southwestern Ontario, where she got interested in livestock health and agricultural research. Her project is looking at drinking water quality and calf health. The idea is to better understand whether the water cattle are drinking could play a role in exposing calves to pathogens and affecting early life health outcomes and the overall water quality. She's looking at cow-calf farms to be part of the study. What it takes, she's taken water samples from drinking sources, collecting calf fecal samples. She'll get you to answer some questionnaires about your farm, no cost. You get the results, and it'd be everything's kept confidential. And yeah, within 3 hours of go. So anybody interested, see me or grab your number, and yeah, it's good research for our calves on grass and seeing what's going on. Okay, I'd like to introduce our speaker. The speaker spent over 20 years with Brandon studying beef and forage production, coaching sports, ag in the classroom, youth development. He was an executive director of the Manitoba 4-H Council for 7 years. In 2013, he was a Nuffield Scholar, along with two of his great friends and great friends of mine, Caitlin Kreisberg over here, and Blake Vince, and they were also 2013 scholars along with them, so the clan is all here. Has presented on forage production in 18 countries around the world, employed with Manitoba Beef and Forage Initiatives, operates a family farm in Manitoba, cow-calf, backgrounding, and custom grazing. Folks, I'd like to present Clayton Robins.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Tim. It really is a great pleasure to be here tonight. I've had the privilege of giving talks in many, many places, but I got to admit, standing in front of a group of farmers is really where I'm in my zone, and it's a pleasure to be here. So thanks to Tim and to Melissa for the offer and for a chance to come share some thoughts with you. Before we get going, I just want to say that we're, that's right, brand new pointer. So I'm going to throw a lot of stuff at you tonight, and I do that on purpose. I'm going to challenge the way you think, challenge you to think differently. Don't get wrapped up in all of it. It's a lot to take in tonight, and it's too much to take in. But I left my presentation back. There's no hidden secrets or anything on here, so if there's anything you don't understand, Tim's going to have it. You can get hold of him and stuff. And then there's going to be some stuff that I cover that's actually in my Nuffield report, much more in depth, and you can go back and get it. It's online with Nuffield Canada, pretty easy to access. And if there's something you don't understand, put your hand up and ask a question. We don't have to wait till the end to get questions. If there's something that can drive discussion during the presentation, let's have at it. I won't lose my train of thought or my place. So, whoop, we need to plug this PC in. Have you got a cord? So the first slide here is just my son. We host a lot of stuff on our farm. The Nuffield experience has been one of the most profound things I've been a part of. Great friends, great knowledge, and we get a lot of people in to see what we're doing now because of what I learned around the world, and we put that stuff to practice at home. Part of that came from being 22 years in a really forward-thinking research program in Brandon as well. We were really doing some cutting-edge stuff when I was with Ag Canada up to 2011. So that's my son there. He farms with me. He's trying to push us up to 150 cows from the 100. We both work out. We're a small farm. But he wants to grow it, and that's Canadian Forage and Grassland Association tour we had on our farm that year. This is one of my absolute favorite pictures. They did an interview on us for a national magazine. As a 4-H family, we were a 4-generation 4-H family, 5-generation farm going back to 1891. And it was one of the best pictures my dad ever took. He didn't smile very often, but with the cows in the background, you got to smile at a dad. So we lost him 4 years ago, but that one sits in front of us in the house every day. So if you end up on back roads around rivers and you happen to see a gate that looks like that, pop in and say hi. That's the entrance to our farm. We are Heritage Farm 125. We received a conservation award a few years ago, and we're on the Verified Beef program, Verified BP+. We believe in all that stuff very strongly. And like I say, I think this year we hosted probably 45 different visitors from about a dozen countries, so you're welcome all the time to come to our farm. I'm going to bring this slide back up later. I brought it up right now just to give you an idea of what we're going to be talking about today. So we run a combination of perennials and annuals. It's a system. We graze in a system. And that's what I want to focus on, is the system and not the individual stuff within. That's how to make the system work better. But this here is our oldest quarter going back to 1891. This particular field is 35 years old, seeded in 1990, and it was seeded at 5% alfalfa, which is going to be something that you're going to be impressed with when you see what it looks like here now. This field was seeded in 2001, and this field here was seeded just 2 years ago. And you can see the one that was the youngest, which should be the most vigorous and have the best growth. That picture is in this summer in a dry year. It looks the worst. And it's because of how we graze and how we get deep roots. And I'm going to talk a lot about that, about how to get the most out of your perennial pastures. And then we have some land over here. This is an intermediate field, is what they call for this LEAP project, but it's been 15 years into what we call our cover crop field. It's a long season annual crop. So we have annuals growing like a perennial. And we're using high sugar species in that mix, and I think it's great results. And my neighbor's quarter here, which is about 30 years of low disturbance seeding, more or less zero till, but sometimes a little more disturbance than they like. And it was part of that study as well, this LEAP project. We'll get into it a little bit later, but I just wanted you to see the field. And then we include this long narrow field here now is on my son's land, and it is also in our annuals grazing now. And it's been, I'm going to say about 8 or 9 years now. That was the field that he was actually pictured in. I like putting up quotes all the time. You're going to see some really good quotes from me. Blake and Karen, or Caitlin will recognize this name. Sarah Gibbons is one of our fellow scholars from 2013. If you change the way you look at things, the things you look at will change. And I'm going to challenge you today to change the way you're thinking about how we approach grazing. And I had to pull this picture out. We just took another one now. We look a little bit older, but we took another one tonight that I'm going to cherish, and it will be right beside this one on the computer. So, but we were the class of 2013, and it was one of the best experiences I've ever had, and especially getting to know these two. So, and believe me, I spend a lot of time looking like this. In fact, I'd probably say that I've rubbed all the color out of the bottom of my beard because that's why it's gray. But you might recognize the gentleman in the background, Ippy. Yeah. He was flying around his brand new drone. I didn't realize he was taking pictures of me when I was visiting his farm in Australia. But anyways, I'm an analytical thinker. That's why I was a really good fit with research. It was a great part of my life. I challenge myself to try and understand things and try and push the limits as much as I can. And I really do spend a lot of time. I really don't sleep well sometimes because the gears just don't turn off. And I think you'll get a sense of that today. But again, it's challenging how we look at things conventionally because there's better ways of doing things. This is probably a diagram you've seen before, and it covers all your trophic levels in our living organisms that are within the soil and feeding off that up to that 5th and higher trophic levels. We've actually measured all 5 in our farm. We had the bird counts were done this summer as part of the LEAP project. I won't get into them today. But you will be seeing data from the first 4. And my first challenge to you is, like, when we used to call ourselves cattle farmers, and then Holistic come along and we were grass farmers that were using cattle to harvest the grass. Regen Ag come along and we were soil farmers, right? I challenge you to think differently. I challenge you to think we're actually in the construction business. We're trying to build a home for all that. That's what drives everything going on in there. How do you build that home? So we're actually in the construction business to design a soil that can house all those organisms and make it really work for you. And I can stand up here and talk for 4 or 5 hours on this stuff, especially leading into the sugars. There's a lot to learn about them, and I love it. But what was really funny, we hosted a Nuffield group in our farm this summer, and I was having dinner with them afterwards, and George Millet, who was a Nuffield scholar from Romania, he summed up everything I could stand here and talk about for an hour and a half in one sentence. And he said, you know what you're doing, Clayton? You're trying to restore the original prairie soil using annuals, but what really hit home for me is when he said, and it's working, because of what he saw on our farm. And that, made me feel really good, but made me realize that other people are seeing it too. So how do we design resilient systems in Canada? We won't talk about like holistic and regen ag aren't terms that we use in our farm. We talk about resiliency, my son and I, and looking out. Like, what do we need to do to build a farm that's going to be viable for him when he's my age? He's 30 years younger than me. So we're looking out 30 years is what we're trying to do on our farm. So a resilient farm in Canada, to me, with cattle, You have to have an adaptive rotational grazing system in your perennial pastures. That's a must. It has to be adaptive to the climate conditions of the year. Strategic and prolonged rest periods. And that is absolutely critical, to have that not just prolonged, but strategic rest periods. So you guys, in some of those rest periods, you have to find another source of feed. So we use annual forages. Maybe it's an alternative feeding strategy. My boss got a phone call at MBFI. She was going to get like 600 bags of carrots that was no good for the vegetable. And we were going to try to figure out how to feed them. Well, we could have figured out a way to do that with something to rest our pastures for a month with the cow herd, right? So it doesn't always have to be grazing. If something comes along your way, an opportunity to feed, and you can rest your pastures at a critical time, go for it. It's probably better than trying to do it in the wintertime, especially with frozen carrots, because apparently they can be a choking hazard. So, use species that feed and build the microbiota in the system, and that includes both the soil and the rumen. My Nuffield scholarship was on feeding the rumen, looking at high sugar plants to feed the rumen and all the physiological processes associated with that. And it was a mind-blowing experience, what I learned, and it's a really lengthy report. But what we found out was we started changing the soil at a faster rate than we could have ever imagined. The rumen became secondary. And we actually added a species in that I had not considered originally because it's a poor forage quality, but Phacelia is a phenomenal soil builder, and it's been, ever since we started realizing what was going on under our feet, Phacelia's been in the ground. And then match your animal to your forage quality. So when you see what we do, we will dormant graze late in the year because we use our annuals in fall. You're going to see that here shortly. But we've got the calves weaned by then, so we're grazing a dormant forage, but we got a dry cow. You got a dry cow in a bowl. The nutrient requirements aren't there. Your calves are in a dry water or somewhere else. So you can match that stockpiled dormant forage, where you're doing very little grazing damage after it's frozen off, to your class of animals, and that's really critical. So to get to a different mindset, let's think about how the soils in the northern Great Plains were formed. They were formed with season-long green cover and deep living roots. And that's what we try to achieve with our perennials, and we find that we're actually achieving it with our annuals as well. You want a diverse species of flora and fauna, right? Grazing was a big part of it. Large species, and again, often with very long periods of rest and recovery. Recovery is the key. Fire was a big part of it. Don't recommend that the way they get away these days when it's dry, but it was a big part of forming the prairie soils. There's no doubt about it. So the goals of our grazing model, we eliminate grazing in the critical acclimation period in the fall, which used to be much earlier. Our fall season has moved back quite a bit. I think you're seeing the same thing here. So for us, September 10th to November 10th. 6 weeks ahead of a killing frost and 2 weeks after. Generally in a good year, probably 2 weeks ahead of a killing frost is good, but because we are so dry and such poor soil, you got to allow for dormancy when that plant is not growing and not building reserves in its root system or its storage depots, right? So 6 weeks in front, 2 after, and we got to find 8 weeks of grazing or some alternative feed. So we got replacing that fall grazing with annual forage species. And I got to preface the next part. We actually came upon this by accident. We were running 240 ewes. We had a pasture that you're going to see here in a bit was seeded with 5% alfalfa because I was worried about bloat. And we got an opportunity to start custom grazing leafy spurs with the ewe flock. So we would wean the lambs off in June. We would take the dry ewes over to about 15 miles away. They would graze for 3 months on leafy spurs. Farmer was happy. I was happy because I got free grazing. And our pastures were getting rested because the lambs weren't really taking that much, and most of them were gone by August anyways. What we started seeing was we had a spreader alfalfa, so creeping rooted alfalfa. We went from 5% to 10 to 15 to 20 to 25 to 30. And all of a sudden we were bloating lambs in June on the alfalfa content. And plus with other things in my life, it was time for the sheep to go because I was traveling a lot more and everything else. But we got rid of the sheep in 09 because we realized that was a strategy we wanted to adopt. And we were going to have to raise cattle if we were going to do it. Because their sheep are really good about figuring out ways to die. So we bumped the cattle herd up a little bit, dropped it a bit when I was traveling a lot for a lot of years, and dialed that back in 2018. And now we're sitting at 100. My son wants to go to 150, so we're designing a system that's going to get us there, and then we like to say be viable for him when he's my age. So what we do with our annuals, we use a main crop and an understory cover crop. So it's like a 2-crop system, but they all get seeded the same day. and one will be, we'll talk about it a bit, but one gets cut and baled, and then the other one just keeps on growing underneath. So we created a full season growing system, but they're annual species. In some cases, they're biennial, right? Or we might even get 3 years out of some of them. But I think the key to what we do is the fact that we are using high energy dense or high water soluble carbide, high sugar forage species that are very, very high in sugar, like rocket fuel high. That's different from what everybody else is doing. And we assume that was probably a big part of what was going on. The more data we get, it's probably getting safer and safer to say. Like I'm careful about saying it's an absolute, because there is no absolutes, and these are complex systems. But we're about the only one that's using these high sugar species, and there were some really unique anomalies about our data this year with the LEAP project. So I need to put this picture up. I used to put it up at the end, and then nobody could envision actually how we did it, but this is how we do it. So we used to, at one point there was swath grazing. Anybody remember swath grazing? Or maybe they do it down here still, but they were swath. And yeah, we pioneered that in Brandon back in the late 90s, the research in that. I didn't like it. The loss of quality in the swath was horrific. We started making small square bales at home. Worked okay, but it was a real pile of work. And one year they got rained on and got wet and turned into ice cubes, and that was a bad idea. So we tried silage bales. That was okay, but it doubled the cost of production to get the silage bales made. So now we just turn our round baler down to make 36 to 40 inch bales and bale them dry. Put as little string as possible. And so the main crop that's what it looks like after it gets cut. We usually end up about 8-9 small bales per acre. And then we strip graze it every 2 days in the fall. This will get cut like in late July, early August. So we get lots of regrowth, and then we give enough 2 days of feed between the bales and the regrowth. And now we're getting enough cows, we haven't got enough acres, we're actually rolling some bales out just to stretch them up there a little bit longer to make sure that we're giving our perennials the rest that they need. But you needed to see that picture to understand what we actually do in that fall period. So our overstory main crops, we use cereals year in and year out. We're flip-flopping back and forth between barley and oats. The odd time we try to short on or a hybrid triticale haven't worked as well in our system as the oats and the barley. We're not seeing any disease yet. We're really particular on varieties that are disease resistant, but I think because we have the multi-species mixes, we're not seeing any problem with the cereals year in and year out for 15 years in a row. And we often will use forage peas or faba beans as a companion to get some nitrogen in the system. We did struggle with the nitrogen availability for a few different reasons, but we think we're starting to see the nitrogen cycling back out now, and with some fixing. So again, cultivars that are good that in your area, that are adapted and good disease resistance are important. We cut back on the seeding rate a little bit so we're not hurting the plants in the bottom. We harvest at a very early stage. We will cut that crop 55 days after seeding, partly because it makes a very, very high quality in the bale. You're trying to grow a cow and calf, you want a high quality forage in that bale. And the other thing is the understory species that we're using, I'll have them up in a minute, they really start to take off about 55 days after seeding. So getting that canopy off them and letting them get ready to rock and roll is how we want to approach it. Assuming we got good moisture at the time. Sometimes they're so dry it takes them a while to grow after. We live in a pretty dry part of the world, even though we got some decent soil on some of our fields. So and you can see we leave them in the field as a small dry bale or a baled haylage. So the understory crops, we use a tetraploid Italian ryegrass. Tetraploid is very important versus the diploid. Different growth habit, but more so in the ability to get more sugar, and I'll explain why on a couple slides from now. We've also used festuloliums. They're twice as much cost as Italian ryegrass, but they've got some benefits in terms of rooting, and I got a really good picture I'm going to show you later on them. Festuloliums, I think, have a place if you can find ones that do well on your land, and that takes some doing. Italian ryegrass seems to do really well. Pretty much any variety we try, but festuloliums are a little more hit and miss. Herbs, chicory and narrowleaf plantain, absolutely critical in our system. If you're going to go to grazing cover crops and that, I would caution using chicory if you're taking that field in and out of cash cropping. Chicory can become a weed very, very, very quickly. We don't care because we're using the same field year in and year out, and it is a phenomenal forage, especially in year one, but what it's doing below the ground is just unbelievable. The narrowleaf plantain, I explained a lot better in my report, but it's a very, very good forage and really good for soil, but it's also really good for nitrogen cycling in the grazing animal. That you will never see a urine spot if you've got plantain in a grazed forage. there's about 4 reasons. We won't get into it today because that's a whole other talk, but it's a really good forage to have in the bottom. Not necessarily as productive as some, but very high quality leaf for what you get. And then even on a year, if it gets to 2nd and 3rd year, even when it's in the reproductive phase, the leaf quality is much, much better than what it would be with the chicory. So we use other dicots, Phacelia, flax once in a while, sugar beet. We have kind of strayed away from the sugar beet. We're trying to get on some of our salinity right now, but we found that the beet was really accumulating a lot of nitrate in the leaves, so we've kind of backed off on it. And so Phacelia is kind of the main one. We will throw some clovers and vetches in the bottom as well, just to have a bit more of a diversity and a bit of nitrogen fixing. And then we'll use winter cereals just about every year. Fall rye, really cheap to get and does really good. You seed fall rye in the spring, it'll stay vegetative right through to the fall, and it'll start growing the next spring. We can get a week or 10 days of grazing before we spray that field off and seed it again the next year. So the fall rye is a really nice fit in that. We put about a bushel per acre in the bottom. So here's a really good picture. This is at one of the premier grass testing facilities in the UK. This is in Crossnet Creevy, North Ireland. And these are 2 plots side by side. And the lighting in here is not as easy to tell, but the one on the left, does it look a little darker green? Can you tell? Okay. That is exactly the same variety, but the one on the left has been turned into a tetraploid instead of a diploid. So tetraploids, they tend to be more aggressive and more upright, so it's easier for the animals to grade. The diploids are really good in the UK and New Zealand because they're basal and they form almost like a sod. But the tetraploid, you have twice as much genetic material, so you got a bigger nucleus, which means you have a bigger cell, and your bigger cells basically have more chloroplasts, which means you have a greener plant that has more photosynthesis. And then photosynthesis is driving the entire system. So anytime you get a chance, if you have to choose between a tetraploid and a diploid in your grazing system, when we know that photosynthesis is important and sugars are important, go with the tetraploid. This is the Festuloleum diamond. So anybody that plays a Festuloleum, there's 4 potential parents. You've got Italian ryegrass on the top, perennial on the bottom, tall fescue, and meadow fescue. And they crossbreed them all the time. And what they'll do, there'll be a dot show up in this diamond, and it will tell you how much parentage comes from different species. So if it's really close to meadow fescue, it's probably got a lot of meadow fescue in it. If it's out in the middle, it's got all 4. But generally, you're going to see them moved around. And depending what you're looking at, for leaf type or rooting or how well adapted they are, you need to really know the parentage and the species of the Festuloleum. Just don't go by Festuloleum. And that's why they're not as consistent until you find one that works for your farm. Okay? So it's important to know that and be working with people that know what that differences actually are. And that's courtesy of DLF. So sugars. Been a big part of my life since 2008, and you're going to see why in the next slide. But so there's 3 things that really impact sugar production in a plant. Solar intensity is absolutely number 1, and you're going to see actually how it cost me the last couple of years in terms of what happened to our soil in a few slides. Day length is the other one, because as you're accumulating sugars throughout the day, the plant just keeps accumulating. And then evening temperature is even more critical. Because in the evening, if you remember your physiology from high school, the plants at night, they use sugars to burn up carbon dioxide to release oxygen, right? So the plant burns up sugars at night. So it's always going to be lower in the morning than what it was at the end of the day before. If the evening's cool, the plant shuts down respiration and the sugars don't get burned up. So as you get later and later in the fall, your sugars start at a higher point in the daytime. And even though you got shorter days, you're starting here instead of here, then it's easy to get to here, right? So, but you still need the solar intensity. So I put this picture up of where we live. We're just west of Brandon, if anybody knows Manitoba, 3 hours west of Winnipeg. We have a army base built right next to our town in the Second World War because we have the most cloudless hours of sunlight in Western Canada. We have solar intensity in Rivers, Manitoba, and let me tell you, it costs us sometimes because we don't get anywhere near enough rain. But solar intensity is a big driver, and you can see this chart is actually from the 50s. So as your light intensity goes up and your days cool off, look at the potential for sugar in your plants. It's huge, right? That's when you're at your peak, and that for us is in October in Manitoba. Probably be a little bit later for you guys here. So I like showing this slide on the left. I never believed in epiphanies or life-changing moments until I saw this slide. I was privileged in 2008. Oh, shoot. We got power cord. So I'll keep talking while we get the picture back up. The slide was in Spanish. In 2008, I was very privileged to be able to be a part of a team that was sent down to Argentina to look at the beef value chain. Life-changing experience for me in a lot of ways. We learned a ton. But one of the things we learned was a slide that Annabelle put up. And Annabelle was someone who became a very, very dear friend of mine. At the time, he was one of their lead scientists. And we've actually ended up going to speaking tour together in 10 years ago. At the time, he was the head of animal research in Argentina. You need a cord?
No, I got it. Plugged in.
Oh. Oh, maybe it just got bumped out there. Okay. So Annabelle and I really, but he showed this one slide. We were in Trenkinoken, a small town, 7 in the morning before we were heading out to look at some ranches and feedlots and some other stuff and everything. And he put this slide up. And it literally changed my life, because we've been trying to do grass-fed beef or forage-fed beef at the research station, and we were struggling. And we couldn't figure out why. And it was my light bulb moment, because that slide actually shows a very direct relationship between plant sugar and animal average daily gain in Argentina. And they can't get anywhere near the sugars that we can. So there's more to it than that. Nothing, like I said, everything's complex. Nothing's ever that simple, but there is a relationship between plant sugar and available energy for the animals, and in a forage finishing system like the Argentinians have, it's important for them. North America is one of the only jurisdictions in the world that I was in, and we don't measure sugars in plants unless you ask for it specially. We look at fiber and do an inverse relationship to energy. But everybody else checks they even check for sugar in silage, which it's gone, because it got burnt up by the bacteria making the silage. But they still do a sugar test with silage in the UK and New Zealand and all other places. So the sugars became a focus of mine. We focused on it at the research station for a while. I left Ag Canada in 2011, and then realized the only way I was going to keep learning about it was to try and do something like an outfield scholarship, and I'm very fortunate that I was awarded that scholarship and got selected the same year as Blake and Caitlin. And so it was right there, 60. Thank you very much. And it was such a profound thing for me that I still show the slide in the original Spanish. Because it was just, and my whole life has been a focus on that since 2008. And what it's done for our farm, you're going to see here, has been astronomical. So don't get too wrapped up. Oh. Just close that out, right? That's a Teams thing. All right. Don't get too wrapped up in all this charts for other things and that. There's just a couple things I want to draw your attention to. Look at the plant sugar content. In the fall on our farm on October 25th, we had plants that were 39% sugar. The plants you're going to see in your pastures here at that time of year are going to be below 10. Okay. Even the chicory was quite high. So with that kind of level of energy, we rivaled the energy value of oats grain and barley grain. We were right in between. So you're getting the energy equivalent of feeding grain without the risk for rumen acidosis for a few different reasons that I won't go into today, but it's a lot less risk of getting acidosis than you would by feeding grain. But the sugars are very, very high. And one of the things they really focused on in Wales, Dr. John Moorby, was the sugar to protein ratio. And we're almost, in Canada, we're almost always the wrong way. We're 2-to-1 protein to sugar. In Argentina, their goal on everything is 1-to-1. And other countries that do some forage finishing, they aim for 1-to-1. They're overcast, they can't get the kind of sugars that we do. These forages, if you look at the crude protein and the sugar content, we're 2-to-1, bang on the money. They try to breed and develop forages to get to 2-to-1. We're doing it naturally with what we can do in western Manitoba. The other thing I want to draw your attention to, because this is going to come out later on in some other slides, is that these, the ryegrass, as somewhat, but more so the chicory, really good scavengers at pulling nutrients out of the system. Calcium, most importantly, because what the soils experts are telling me is going on, the chicory and the plantain are pulling unavailable calcium out of the system and returning it back into the system in an available form. So, which is better for the system and better for building soil, because calcium is a big soil builder. So it's being returned through the urine, the manure, and the roots of the shoots that aren't eaten. So we are unlocking calcium in our soils with these plants. And here is November 7th, the year later. That was a year after I learned about plantain in 2014, brought it in. By that time of year, we had actually had 23 nights below zero, 3 nights as low as -9 Celsius. And you could not tell that those plants have been frozen at all, because the sugar almost acts like an antifreeze, right? So even as late as November 7th, we still had, where's the sugar here? We still had 34% sugar, 29 and 31 of the plantain. And you can actually add 10% to them, because we don't, what we should be doing is taking them, flash freeze them in nitrogen, and then send them into the lab, because then you shut down biological activity. Because we don't do that, they go through stage 1 drying in the lab, which will burn up 10% of the sugars in natural respiration. So the plants in the field that day were actually 10% higher than what that number is. So we were actually, low, high 30s, almost 40. But what was really interesting was, when you look at the protein to sugar ratio, we were actually just about 3 to 1 sugar to protein. And I actually happened to bump into John Werby at a science conference in the States the year after I got these samples. I took John out to lunch and showed him these numbers, and I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "I haven't got a clue." So this is a guy that spends his whole life looking at sugars. They didn't even know that 3 to 1 was possible. And because of it, he had no clue what it's doing in the rumen of our animals. Like, it was just mind-blowing for me that they... And he said, "You told me you could grow sugar in Manitoba," but he said, "I had no idea it could be that good." So the other thing again here, look at the ability to scavenge calcium and phosphorus. This is huge. If you use the relative feed value, like, those numbers are really, really high, right? So we're seeing really, really high quality forage there, basically rocket fuel. So this is what our system looks like. Talked about it earlier. We will graze our perennial pastures rotationally for the first 4 months, 2 months in here, usually early October, and then as long as we haven't got snow, or we haven't been so dry that we haven't got regrowth, we will go back out and get those dormant forages. And some years we don't get them because we get too much snow or whatever. They're there, we take them the next spring. That forage material is there the next spring. So that's what our system looks like. I got another quote. I love this one. I had a privilege of giving a talk in Mount Forest here a few years ago. Does anybody in this room know Mike Swiderski at all? Yeah, I figured probably a few people. I really like Mike. He put this quote out in his talk, and I think it is so elegant in its simplicity to make you think. And for me, it's what is my November grass worth. But for you guys, it's what is your December grass worth. For Blake, it could be January grass because you're that much later. But what are you doing to have grass in December, right? And economically, what does that mean to have grass in December? It's a really good question in simplicity, and it makes you think, what do I have to do to get there? And what am I gaining when I do get there? And I just thought it was a great quote. I told Mike I was going to use it, but he was going to get credit for it every time. And it really makes you think about, what do I need to do to get to there? So one of the things we also changed our thinking on a few years ago, when we started looking a lot closer to soil, was below ground. And we always look at what's above ground. We talk about, species mixes to maximize leaf area and maximize photosynthesis. No, it's great. Yeah, that's important. Don't get me wrong. But 75% of your soil building is happening below the ground, 85% likely. And so what we got thinking about was, what can I do to fill that entire space with roots? So there's really good diagrams out there. You can see all these different species have a very different root profile. Root architecture, root morphology is the technical term for it, but root architecture. So just imagine overlaying one of these really dense, thick ones on top of that fibrous one, right? Or that one right there over top of that one. And then you start adding more species in. So you're filling that entire soil area with roots. And those roots are building soil. They're pushing out root exudates to feed the bugs. And the whole system feed the plants. And in turn, those bugs unlock nutrients and feed the plants. So let's start thinking about what's below the ground and start thinking about the plants that we're using in our systems and how many we need to use. Like, I don't recommend using species that don't grow on your farm just for the sake of seeding them, but use species that will do well on your farm and pay attention to what the roots look like for both your annuals and your perennials. Really important. And if you are starting to play with them, there is a really good website from Netherlands, Verenigde University. It's actually spelled Wageningen, but it's pronounced Verenigde. We struggle with that as Nuffielers when we travel all the time, right? Like Ireland, their agriculture organization is spelled Teagasc, but it's pronounced Chagas. So, as Nuffielers, we just get used to butchering all the local vernacular.
I'm married to a Dutch girl.
Yeah. Yeah, so then you know Verenigde is right?
Not quite.
Oh, is it not? What is it?
Wageningen.
Oh, okay. I still got it wrong. And I was told I had it right. So they've had 100 years of root drawings. So you can go in there, and if you're trying to think about a species in your farm, there's possibly a good chance, and they're all still drawn by hand, but it's a great resource to go in. And then in your mind, just start overlaying them, and what can I do to fill that soil space with roots? So now we're into our pastures at home. This is that perennial pasture sowed in 1990 at 5% alfalfa, never been overseeded. This is a picture from a couple years ago. We are hovering around 45-50% alfalfa because of spreader roots, never been grazed in the critical period before frost, and the 2 weeks after for 25 years in this field. This is a 36-year-old field. Still quite productive. The alfalfa is very short. It's spreader 2. That's how far back it goes. It's spreader 2 for anybody who knows the spreader varieties. And this is the kind of soil we're on. Yet it can still look like that. On a dry year, not so much, but it still actually does pretty good. We are literally sand over gravel lenses on that quarter. This is that same pasture in the bottom where it's a little bit better soil in some certain spots and a few of the low spots. You can see we have much different soil. We are really building that soil. Really hard to build soil in sand over gravel. Like, it's hard to get improvements there. But where the soil's better, it looks quite a bit better. The next pasture we sowed that I showed on the map, this is in 2001. Again, very light, gravelly soil underneath. The slide here is on a wet year, looking pretty good. That's actually last year in a drought. And you can barely see it, but there's an alfalfa sticking up above the seat of the quad. It was about 50 inches high last year, the alfalfa in that field, spreader 4. 25 years old, never been grazed in the fall. And we were dry. The year before we were wet, and the picture of me on the right is actually, I'm not holding up flowers to give to my wife. She would laugh hysterically if anybody ever suggested that would happen. But that is the height of the alfalfa 2 years ago in the wet. It was 60 inches high. 25 years old. So what we do on our farm, we set our plants up to grow when things are good. So when things are good, and we got moisture and we got the conditions are right, when my neighbor's crops grow halfway to their knees, my pastures get to my hip pockets, right? So then we get the feed that carries us through the summer. That's how you build resiliency. And this is a pasture sown in 2023. The first year after we seeded it was really wet. I was telling Blake, we got 6 weeks of grazing on 55 acres of sand over gravel with 100 pairs. And we literally had to drive a tractor across the field to make a trail to put the step-ins in because we couldn't walk through it. It was this high, and it went down to about hip high, and it was so tangled you couldn't walk 3 feet into it. And last year was very, very dry. And I remember I pointed that field out, said it was a lot browner at the start. Well, look at the patches last year. I know it's a little harder to see, but the really dark brown, like it was shriveled off to nothing. And the reason is, it's only 2 years old. I need another 8 or 10 years to get those roots going down deep. The 25-year-old and the 35-year-old pasture have deep, deep, deep roots because that's all they do in the fall. We're not doing any grazing damage. That plant is doing nothing but putting around roots and building up root reserves. And then it's ready to rock and roll in the spring when things are good. And that spring growth carries us through. So now we're going to switch into annuals a little bit. And if I can recommend anything on perennials that you want to try at home, I would recommend just find a little patch in your pastures and just put a little, you got electric fence, straighten, whatever you want to do, fence off 100 square feet, and then don't let it get grazed for a year. See what it looks like the next year. Do the same 100 feet the year after that again. And it might take 2 or 3 years to see something, but if all of a sudden you're starting to see that by eliminating grazing for a certain period in your area is improving your pasture, then it should become part of your strategy. So it doesn't take much to fence off a little area and see what it does by just not letting your cows anywhere near it in the critical period. We got the technology to play with that. And I had a really good chat with a group of farmers. There was 30 farmers from Australia came to our farm this summer in their progressive ag learning group, and they were all going to go and try that because, like, what do you got to lose, right? And then figure out when and how they're going to make the difference. So again, same thing. When Quinn and I get into, and this is from the Cotswolds in England because they do a lot of cover cropping over there. You know, you got your really taproot aggressive types. You've got all other kinds of different species you can choose for cover crops. But same thing. We got thinking about what does the root of that one look like? What's it going to fill? What's that one going to fill? Right? So when we talk about, we got a cereal, we got a faba bean or a pea, we got 4 or 5 species, we have combinations of dicots, we got legumes, we got grasses. So we're trying to fill that top 4 feet full of roots if we can. Top 2 feet for sure. And actually what got me really thinking about it was the first year in 2014 when we had the chicory and the plantain. I pulled that plant out of the ground and the taproot of the chicory and the really aggressive rubbery lateral roots of the plantain that are really good for breaking up soil. When I saw the 2 of them working together in tandem, that was another light bulb moment for me that I got to pay attention to this stuff a lot more. It was that plant right there digging up with the shovel that said, let's take another look at this thing. So, and this, I want to talk about the Italian ryegrass and the festulolium. So the festulolium is usually crossed out at usually around 50% of having a festu in it, which we know are much deeper rooting. Ryegrass is a great plant, but shallow rooted, right? So this is in the breeding greenhouse in Aberystwyth, Wales. It is a premier grass breeding facility for high sugar species in the world. This is their root trainers. So you can see the roots. This is an Italian ryegrass plant, and the roots kind of end just below his wrist. They trickle down, maybe 1 or 2 stragglers going down a little bit. It's a little harder to see, but that entire tube is full of roots, and that's a festulolium. So if you want to put deep rooting in and maybe have something that handles the drought better or uses up water better, maybe you can go to a festulolium. And the previous slide talked about all the benefits of having those different species in there. Like there's all kinds. They flower at different stages, so your pollinators are getting better benefits. You're maximizing your photosynthetic ability because you got a bigger solar panel with them filling up the entire canopy, right? But the one thing they didn't mention in that previous slide was drought. And what they're finding now in the UK with a lot of their cover crop systems is that their traditional pastures and New Zealand's the same, Ireland's the same, the traditional ryegrass, perennial ryegrass pastures or ryegrass and clover pastures are burning up in the droughts that they're getting now, which, I mean, drought in the UK is a bad deal. But yet these systems are thriving. And they've been pushing them since about 2013. I talked to the right people in 2013. They got me going down a good path. They saw the potential, and they got their key producers on it, and now it's starting to take off like waves in those countries now. And it got them through the droughts. And they start seeing a better animal performance, especially with sheep and lambs. So how are we doing improving our soil? I've been saying since day one, when we started seeing what's happening in our soils, we were actually improving the soil in our annual field faster than we were in the perennials, which should be exactly the opposite. You think perennials, long growing season, deep roots in that, you should be building soil, healing your soil much faster. Everything we were seeing and measuring, even though it was snapshots in time, was telling us I was doing a better job of getting better soil in the annuals. And you're going to see some data here that absolutely perfectly supports that. So this is where we started with a few years ago. At that field, we got salinity in our part of the world, so not a bad couple of inches at top, but a very tight, kind of a grayish type soil clay underneath, and then into a yellow clay. A few years later, we were starting to see a little bit more aggregation, and now that's where we're at this year. You can see it is deep and black and rich, and I call it black cottage cheese, is what I call it now. And the odd time you'll hit a bit of yellow clay, but basically every time you can go right to the depth of a spade right now, and you dig that thing up, and it is just crumbly black dirt all the way through. And we've done that in 15 years, which is amazing. I'm not a soils guy, but I saw how long it took to change soil with conventional thinking and conventional management. This has been a really mind-blowing eye-opener for me, and the scientists are starting to take notice as well. So this is what some of our regrowth will look like in the fall, and I had to show this. I actually got a call and a message from, this is the LEAD project. Ashley was taking samples in our farm this spring in April, and they were going down to 2 feet with a soil probe, and she called me because those are higher trophic level bug holes, earthworm holes, at 2 feet. They had never seen it before, especially in yellow clay. We have changed our soil down to 2 feet to the point where it supports enough oxygen to support higher trophic life. And they had never seen it before. And they take thousands of soil samples all over the place. So we were really excited about that. Don't know what it means all yet. We got a lot more samples to take, but it was they were pretty excited to see it, and they sent some more data that I'm going to share here in a minute. I had to share this one for Blake because I knew he was coming. I was going to put it up anyways, but everybody's familiar with the barrier on these. Blake's pushed that for a long time, right? About 10 or 11 years ago, I had the privilege of giving a talk at the International 4-H Conference, the very first one they ever held. And I was talking on resiliency and regen ag and all those kind of things. And it would have been highly inappropriate for me to hand out underwear to those kids at that event. So we had kids from about 40 or 50 countries there. And so what I did, I bought a whole bunch of cotton face cloths, and I had the 4-H logo sewed in the middle in a polyester type material. And we buried them, and I challenged every kid and every adult in the room to go back home to their country and bury them. They each got 2. And they all sent their pictures back in as to what happened and everything. But so based on everything I've been telling you so far, how many people think that one is out of our annual field? How many people think it's out of our perennial field? Perennial? Yeah. And this was our annual crop. So we had more bugs eating away at that material. Now, part of that could have been due, it was a dry summer, and biological activity was probably pretty retracted, right, in that perennial, because we're in sand over gravel, would have been pretty dry. But it also means we haven't got bug activity. But we were disappointed with that, but not surprising. So it's a good test. The other test you can do to see what you're doing to your perennials is etiolated growth. Has anybody here heard of etiolated growth at all? Etiolated growth is when something grows in the dark. And we did a lot of that when I was at the research station at Brandon. So you can look at your grazing system at home and how you graze your pastures going into the fall and the end of the year. And if you keep track of where you were and when, go back out the next spring before anything starts growing, trim them all off. Don't cut right down into the crown because then you damage the growth. But trim all the leaves and everything off as low as you can, and then cover it. Did anybody here use those big, the new lick tubs and stuff like that, the big dark plastic lick tubs? You need to cover it with something that light cannot get through. And then the only way that that plant can grow is on the root reserves in the root. And if you take that thing off 4 to 5 weeks later, the plant is going to be snow white because it grew without sunlight. And you can tell very quickly the kind of damage you're doing as you're grazing through the fall. So if you go week by week, if you're moving every week, put a one out in every week. And it was an eye-opener for me. The closer we got to a killing frost, and for about the first week after, those plants were severely hindered to get started in the spring. The root reserves were not there. So it's really easy to do at home if you want. And you can just take pictures, you can click and measure them, but whatever. So where are we gaining? Organic matter in our annual crop, we've been slowly creeping up. We really dropped in 2025, and these samples were taken by Lee. This is all the same lab, AgVise in the US. We've been dealing with the salinity going down. The big one is, remember I talked about we're unlocking available calcium. So your calcium to magnesium ratio was a really good indicator of a healthy soil. The higher the number, the better. We have been bumping that up on a pretty steady pace, and we're now at 4.8 to 1 when we started at 3 to 1. But why did I drop in organic matter? And this is why I say it's a really complex system, and don't get wrapped up in the numbers on a one-off, because this was a snapshot in time. So there's a couple things happening there. One of the ones that I thought was a really good point, because we sent a bunch of it your way, there was all those fires in the north, and we were absolutely polluted with smoke for 2 summers in a row. Smoke was inhibiting, it's just like clouds, it was inhibiting our solar intensity. So when you're going to see why, because I got some bug numbers coming up here in a minute, but we were actually losing organic matter because we had more bugs chewing it out than what I could actually replace with the sunlight. But the other thing is, it was very dry this spring when they were taking those samples. We've got other samples where if they go down to 123 centimeters, you guys know when you take soil samples, sometimes they compress and they get jammed up in the tube a little bit, and you've only got about maybe 80 centimeters of dirt in there instead of 120. On a 2-foot sample, you could have 18. Well, a lot of these samples here, we had 0 compression. So we were actually sampling 0 to 6. But this spring, it got pushed together a little bit, and even though she took 0 to 6 off the top, it could have very easily been 0 to 8, right? Because that was jammed together a bit. So we were actually not sampling the same soil, if you understand what I'm saying. So don't get wrapped up in a number going really high and getting excited, or one going really low as a one-off. It's about looking at it over time from the same spots. It's about tracking your farm. So I talked about what we did. You saw that. So this is our annual crop again. We were really, really dry in the fall of 2018. Does anybody here do any infiltration work at all on your own land, your pastures or your hay fields or anything? Okay. Quinn and I went out with a 4-liter milk jug. We pounded a little plastic ring in the ground. I have a video, but it doesn't seem to show unless I'm actually using my own laptop. But we made a mark and we poured water in 1.5 inches at a time until we ran out of water in the milk jug. The first 6 inches soaked away in 4 minutes and 34 seconds. 9 inches of water soaked away in 8 minutes and 38 seconds. And we ran out of water in the milk jug. We had poured 12 inches of water into that ring and it was gone in 13 minutes and 23 seconds. Blew us away. I mean, it wasn't going straight down, it was going everywhere. But we had soil. Now, we can't take a 12-inch ring because obviously it's going everywhere. But we can take a 4-inch ring and it won't pond. And my neighbors are inundated. So we've improved soil structure that much. And just as to appreciate how incredible that is, with the big heavy equipment we got now, we had some guys at the MDFI on a compaction day this summer, and with the big heavy equipment they got, we got a lot of saline type soils that can really get tight and really get packed with heavy equipment. They had one field on a client they were trying to work with, and they put 1 inch of water into a ring and it took 26 hours to disappear. 26 hours. And now the weather in the prairie is we're getting weeks and weeks and weeks without a drop of rain, and we get a 3 or 4 inch rain. We've been running water off the land as fast as we can for 7 decades in the prairies. And now we got to figure out how to catch it all. It's going to be a total shift in thinking, and we're not ready. Because that's the new norm. So we also have done, and this is Quinn and I have done these samples on our own. We've done some aggregate stability, again, which is a really good indicator of soil health. So the micro and macro aggregates, just don't worry about the numbers. This is pretty typical if you're at the higher end. Our total wet aggregates were about 73, which in our area, that's pretty high. So what's really been neat about, we've been taking snapshots in time. We've had researchers in taking snapshots in time. So we can't make decisions. We can't really tell any absolutes out of all that. But what's been really interesting all the way through, everything we've measured that relates to soil health, we've been at the very upper end of what you would expect it to be, and even beyond. So 73% is pretty high. The other thing we looked at active carbon, and this is the carbon that your bugs feed on because bugs are incredibly important, right? And that at 865 is pretty high. Again, at the very upper end of what soil should be in Manitoba, in cropland. And this is going to get backed up with some of the leak data here in a couple slides down the road. So this is some work by Brandon University. They came out, they were looking at, and this is one of the samples. Terry was going to 123 centimeters. He took 6 cores, and at 123 centimeters, we had 3 of them that had 0 compaction. If he went 123 centimeters, there was 123 in the core. We had 2 of them at 1 centimeter, and we had 1 at 8. So they were actually able to use those cores for actually estimating bulk density, which is another really important thing to do as you start changing your soil. If you start seeing improvements, it's not an absolute to say that the number I saw in 2015 and the one in 2022, it's way better. If you've improved your soil, your bulk density's gone down. And you have to adjust for that bulk density, otherwise you're getting a false high estimate of how much you've improved it. So that's pretty important to do as well. But he honestly believed, based on his samples, that we are increasing carbon by 22% at depth, and by that depth that means 2 to 4 feet, and that we're increasing carbon by 35% at the surface. And the carbon stocks in that annual field were comparable to the samples he took under planned grazing with perennials, which should be your gold standard, right? And even where guys were feeding bales and rolling them out on hay fields. Our numbers were as good as that in that annual crop with those high sugar species. And then he measured microbial biomass carbon, which is the carbon left behind, or the carbon tied up in the bugs that are eating it, at 1,095, and that is extremely high for a cropland. So that was really encouraging. Dr. Terry McGonigal did that work. And this is the one that really got our attention. The Assiniboine West Watershed District came out a couple years ago and took some samples in our farm. And one of the ones they did was a PLFA test. Is anybody at all familiar with PLFA? Yeah, Blake will know, a couple know. So PLFA measures It looks for a fatty acid tail in your bug species, and a lot of your major bug species have that common tail. So it's very, very crude in that it groups them all basically by a couple different kinds of bacteria, a couple kinds of fungi and protozoa. So you're not getting a really good breakdown of all the different species are there, but you're getting a very accurate estimate of how many are there by weight. Okay, so because it does pick it up very good. So again, don't get wrapped up in all these numbers, but I'm going to tell you they are high. The fungi to bacteria ratio came back that we were good, which was encouraging. The bacteria community was considered to be very balanced between the different kinds they would like to see, so that was very encouraging. And then our total biomass of bugs was 8,712 nanograms per gram, which you're saying, well, what does that number mean, Clayton, right? Like, I don't even know what that means. Here's what it means. The chart for PLFA maxes out at 4,000. That's considered excellent. They don't go beyond that. And we were 8,712. One guy said, you got bugs. Put it plain and simply. We got a lot of bugs. So, on 2 years in a row, when I've got a lot of smoke hampering my solar intensity, and we're not getting photosynthesis and sequestering carbon at the same rate, I got bugs chewing up the carbon that's there at a much faster rate. So me dropping to 6.5, I breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief, right? And plus, it could have been some sampling error with the probe, but so that's why it's really important not to get too all wrapped up. And again, this was only one sample, but we're seeing other ones that support it. So we participated in the LEAF project. They measured a whole bunch of different stuff. It actually involved a bunch of indigenous work as well. It was a really cool project. So this periodicity actually refers to some of that. But the rest of these measurements were taken on a series of farms all over Western Canada. I'm going to talk, we didn't have the data from the lead ID and the plant biomass. From the beneficial insects, I can tell you I was out there when they were measuring. They found a lot of predator bugs, which sounds bad, but it's not. It means it's good. It's the kind of bugs that eat your aphids. It's the kind of bugs that eat your flea beetles. The kind of bugs that eat the bad bugs. So having predator insects was really good. And we had quite a few pollinators and some species that they hadn't seen, so they were quite happy with that. I do have data today on the soil physical properties of some of these. We also had bird ID and counts, and I won't share that today, but they did find bobolinks and barn swallows, which are at risk in our area, and they were quite happy with that. These are the fields that were involved. Well, that's us here. These were the ones across Western Canada. It was U of S and U of M. And then again, the most robust sampling we've ever had. We were taking samples here, there, and everywhere, not consistently, but this was the best robust sampling we'd ever had. So I'm really, really pleased to be able to share this data. Again, this was the 35-year-old pasture, 15-year-old cover crop field, and a regular cash crop annual. So this is an active carbon that they measured. So Jamie's field, the annual, was pretty good. Our intermediate was, this is the carbon available for the soil microbes to consume. What was interesting was that carbon was higher in the intermediate than was in the perennial, which wasn't expected at all. And if anybody remembers their statistics, these are your standard error bars and that, so this is basically saying that's statistically significant too, which is a huge thing to say. And then, so you're looking at these numbers here, we're probably about 800 and something right there, and that matches up with what Quinn and I measured earlier in 2001 at 865. So we're consistent with the amount of active carbon, which is a positive sign. This is the one that really got their attention. So we're looking at microbial biomass carbon again, and Quinn and I were going to do these measurements because Terry McGonigal took them, and again, I talked about it here earlier. It was 1,095, $600 a sample to do one in the lab. So Quinn and I said, no, we're going to find other things to do with that money. So, our microbial biomass carbon in our intermediate was massively higher than the other two fields, and that was completely opposite to everything they saw in all the other leaf fields they saw across Western Canada. In every other case, the perennial was much higher than intermediate. So, is it these high sugar species that I'm using because everybody else is using traditional mixes of other stuff, including some brassicas and this and that and everything else? We're not. And is that the difference? I'd like to think so. I'm thinking there's more and more data all the time to say that that is what's going on. But this was really encouraging and raised a lot more questions for them. This is the aggregate stability index, and so again, aggregate stability is a really good indicator of soil health. The more aggregates you got more infiltration, you got more homes for your bugs. A lot of good things going on, right, with aggregates. So this particular number, though, if you look, is actually, we're quite a bit lower. We were 73% compared to this number, and the reason I want to bring this to your attention is this was a different method. There's about 4 different methods of measuring aggregate stability. And if you get, there's a talk you can get online, and they all end up with a different value, right? So this particular one is what's called the Slates app. You can actually do it on your phone. You take some soil off your land, you put in some water, you turn the app on and just film it for about an hour. And you got to plug your phone in because it chews the battery up like crazy, but you can actually get a measurement of aggregate stability as that disperses in the water over that time. So it's a very good, effective app, but it will give you a far different number than that same soil that was sent into a lab that did wet sieving on. So if you're going to do aggregate stability, make sure that you have somebody that is using the same lab with the same procedure. Otherwise, you're not getting a good picture of what's going on. Okay? And I didn't have any control over this because that was Elite. That's what they did. It was the Elite project, and it's free, right? It's a free app, so that's what they're doing. What was interesting was we had a lot more aggregate stability in the perennial, even in that sand and gravel, and that impressed the heck out of us. I've just got a few more slides, then we're going to wrap up. So these are, I love this, and don't worry about the writing now. I know it's really hard to see and everything, but this is a really good visual. This is Sasha Bowen put this up, and this is our perennial field. So even though we are on sand over gravel, and a lot of the other pastures were probably a little bit better, the fact that we're in red, and the blue is the mean of every other perennial field that they sampled last year. So we're close to being as good with some much better soils. We've got some problems because we're low in sulfur and we're low in nitrogen, and it's probably because we haven't got enough sulfur. Even though we got 40-50% alfalfa, it's probably not fixing at a very efficient level. So we're likely going to have to start fertilizing a little bit, which that tells me that. But basically, we're hovering right around that average. And for as poor as our land is on that perennial, I was pretty happy with that. So these are this is Jamie's annual field and our intermediate field. So Jamie's got to be pretty happy because again, the blue is the average of all the cropland fields that they looked at across Western Canada. And his field obviously is showing some benefits by being outside. So anything outside the blue circle is good. Inside's poorer, outside's better. What really hit home for me was how good we're doing with the intermediate. So this is the average of all the intermediate fields, the fields that people were using cover crops on. So, and we are way out with some things like calcium and potassium and some other elements in that. Our pH is climbing, which is a bit of a problem, we think, but we're way outside the average of the cover crop fields. So how would that look if we actually overlaid that on the annual crop fields? We would likely be completely outside the circle and way out, right? So I really, really believe that what we're doing with those high sugar plants is gaining us some ground. Don't get wrapped up in this again. I just want to show, think of this as a system. I was asked to put this slide together actually for a talk in Ontario a few years ago. And these are 17 numbers, so they're not even close anymore, but you'd have to use your own. But the question was, what does it cost you to get that your intermediate, your cover crop field in, and how much do you get back out of it? Well, on paper, if you look at it, we probably really only break even at best, and sometimes might even lose money depending on what's going on. If you look at how much grazing we get just on the annual crop, because we got to seed it every year and spray it, this, that, and everything else, and depending what kind of yield we get and how well we utilize it. But we are eliminating grazing for 2 months on other land, and by being able to go back and get that grazing, and we can supplement a little bit, but what we save on hay and what we save on yardage, all of a sudden, if we attribute that back to that little 20-acre field or the other 30-acre field we got now, that little field made us about $400 an acre. Because in the system, it allowed us, we wouldn't have had the grass growing in the other ones if we hadn't been resting them for those 2 months, right? So it's a system. Don't get wrapped up in the enterprise. Figure out how things work in the system to give you the better enterprise. And we know we're getting way more grazing on the, I would not have pasture to here There's no way, if I was grazing that through the fall for the last 25 years. On that land, we would be here, just like the rest of my neighbors. And I wouldn't be able to carry 100 cows. It's simple math, right? So how much is it really gaining us? Like a pot, I really believe a pot. I haven't got the numbers to tell you because I can't. We just don't measure it. And then the last one I'm going to throw some hard at you again, and this is just again about some economics and some numbers. Just going to bring that back. Oh yeah, sorry. Okay, so this was sketched out for me by a meat scientist in Ohio State University. And he just sketched it on a napkin in his office. We were talking about some stuff, and it was such a cool graph that it's in my report. And I'm going to talk about it here today because it's another thing about economics, about how we can use some of these high energy, high sugar species, especially if you're looking at forage-fed beef, okay? So the magenta line here is back fat. That's how an animal puts on back fat, okay? It's progressive. It's what's the word I'm trying to think of? Compensatory, right? And it's typical. We finish a steer, a heifer, they put on a lot of back fat toward the end of their life, right? It's slow, 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 bang, a lot goes on at the end. The blue line is marbling. Almost everybody assumes that they are linked together because you tend to see the animals get marbling at the same time they have back fat. They are completely unrelated. They are two completely different biophysical processes in the animal. Completely different. It's just that when they happen to see them at the same time and you knock them on the head, you think that they all happen together, and they don't. The trouble with back fat, which is an important part of our flavor and our grading and everything else, it's linear, which means you cannot gain once you lose. You cannot gain it back, right? You can on back fat. You can never do that on marbling. So when you have this, sorry, I'm going to start putting my arrows up. So there, the magenta line is your back fat, your blue line is your marbling. That first drop on that line is a weaning stress. So we don't have weaning stress anymore. I don't know if you guys have ever used those little yellow Mario mustache weaning paddles. Have you guys ever tried them? They're phenomenal. We tried them 25 years ago at the research station. Every guy went out that had cattle and bought them. You put them in their nose for 3 or 4 days, put them back out with a cow, and the calf is with her, but he can't suck. So when you take them out 4 days later and put them in the weaning pen, they go lay down, eat hay, and have water. They don't bellow. Cows are going crazy, but the calf, and it's 50 pounds a gain in the first 6 weeks is the data from Saskatoon. And they're $1 or $2 now. Best investment we ever made in the farm. So you can eliminate that, right? But if you don't eliminate it, your line drops. And then this is a backgrounding phase where you're limiting performance in the winter, trying to get some frame on them, right? So that line drops again, right? That's your backgrounding drop. So you've dropped your marbling line so that it can never reach peak potential, right? With those two stresses. However, if you, and we know this, that feeding high energy to young calves between 110 and 200 days of age will initiate the development of marbling cells, even though they're still sucking that cow. Or you can take them off that cow early weaning and put them on a high energy grain ration or something. They will develop the marbling cells very early. If you don't do that, they're later on in life when they do that. So, but by doing the development of marbling cells when they're still under 200 days of age, you bump that line up. That line is here now, right? And even with that weaning stress, you've raised that line by quite a bit. Or, sorry, the backgrounding stress. So that's huge. So, and you can do that, with high energy feeding. Some really good data out of Japan, out of the US, some other places around the world. I believe that we can probably do it with these high sugar species. We haven't been able to prove it yet, but I have a belief. And all the questions that I had in my report that were really big when I wrote it, 15 years later, or 13 years later now, those question marks are a whole lot smaller. So I'm confident that I think we can do it if we can get these really high sugar, high energy species in that calf, right? and then, you're setting the rumen up for that animal to come back. If that's a replacement heifer, she comes back into your system a year later, and she, and as a mature cow, then her rumen is in that development stage, has been part of that development, has been on those high energy forages in the fall as well. So she should do better as a mature animal because you've developed the rumen microbiology, right? So anyways, by doing that, instead of being at time G and whatever weight they're at to get your AA, AAA animal and all that marbling, and all that back fat, which most of that gets trimmed off anyways, right? And you don't get paid for it. By bumping that line up, you've reached your marbling target and your back fat target at time E1/2. So you've saved all that feed and all that cost, and you're marketing maybe a smaller animal, but that's some of the most inefficient game we have in finishing cattle. So food for thought. It was a great diagram, and it's a lot to take in. It's in my report if you ever want to look at it a little bit further, but I just thought it really, really was kind of cool. So I'm going to end off with another quote. And Gordon Stevenson, I wish I knew he was alive when I was in New Zealand in 2014. I would have gone and visited the man. I found out about him a few years later, and he passed away at a ripe old age of 90-something, but he was a real visionary down there. And his statement was, when you are doing something, consider what would happen if you were to do it for 100 years. And he called it his 100-year rule. So just think about some practice on your farm you're doing right now that you're not even sure if it's the right one or something you really believe in. What's it going to look like if you've done that thing the same way for 100 years? Now, that's too much for a lot of people, I get it. But 30, Quinn and I look 30, look 10. Challenge you to look 10 years out. If I'm doing what I'm doing right now for 10 years, what is that going to look like? Am I going to be happy with it? Is it going to be resilient? Am I going to be still in business by doing that still? With rising energy costs and everything else we're doing. So I challenge you to look at things that way. With that, I'm going to end it. Nutfield 13 was, like I say, one of the most profound experiences of my life, and you can tell I'm living it every day. The journey continues is how I word it. And it's ongoing. My son's a part of it now, which is really cool. So, and I still get to keep touch with all these guys, so it's great. So I apologize again. I threw a lot at you, but Tim has the presentation. So if you need anything off it down the road, my cards are here. The report's there to read. But I challenge the two things to challenge. See if you can find a way to isolate some of your perennial pasture and rest it in a key period when you know it needs to be rested going into some dormancy. See what that does. And if it's working, figure out what you can do to replace that grazing.
Thank you, Clayton. Anybody have any questions? There must be tons of questions out here. It's just a bundle of knowledge.
Yes?
What does your graph look like if you wean at 300 days instead of 210?
No idea. I don't know. From what they told me, that the period between 110, 120 to 200 is that critical period for driving that. I don't know what would happen after 200. There's people you could ask, because that's knowledge from like 15 years ago. They probably know a whole lot more now. So if you know a meat scientist, or if somebody at Wealth can get you in touch with a meat scientist, there's probably a lot more knowledge about that right now. Or if somebody in that early feeding, called early high energy feeding. Yeah. But it's mind blowing, right? To be able to do that, right? Because then, fat cells are dynamic, right? Once you got them, they never go. Like your muscle cells, protein, it's being turned over all the time. Skin cells, everything else is being turned over. Once you develop a fat cell, it's there. It's dynamic. It just fills and empties, right? Same as us. That's once you start getting that, it's hard to get rid of it. So we had a reunion this summer, and the big joke was that we're at the age now, if we suck our gun in, another chin pops out, right? So, but they're dynamic. They're there. So if you need to feed energy later in life to get them to develop, you've cost yourself time. So is there a way to do it when that animal's still in the cow and grazing those high energy forages? She's milking like a trooper. Like they're wet right to their eyeballs, milking on that cow on those pastures in the fall, right? She's milking like crazy. And that calf is eating that stuff too, right? So, but the challenge is with us in our dry environment, am I getting enough yield to trigger that response? I don't know. And if I had more money and time, we would probably be, with the equipment available nowadays, you can actually ultrasound to see if those fat cells are there on a calf that young. The technology is there. We had these in our cows at MBFI last summer. I mean, we're in a new era. There's so much at our disposal for tools. It's a question of time and money. Yeah.
Can you go over that critical window again to be off your pastures in the fall?
Well, for me, and I don't know about you guys, but for us, they used to say 2 weeks or 3 weeks before killing frost and a week or so after.
Okay.
And for years and years and years, and what got me thinking about it was They always told us to park our hay, like in the old days, our killing frost moved back. They used to be in late September, right? Late September. They said park your hay by between the 3rd week in August and the 3rd week in September. Don't cut your hay because you're going to hurt your hay. But we graze through it every year. Right. So why are we grazing through it? If we're hurting our hay field, we got to be hurting our pasture. Now, we're getting much better at resting them, but because of our dormancy, if that plant isn't growing, and like, because the whole point of that rest is to build reserves, right, and put roots down. If we're dry enough that plant's not actively growing, then that period automatically gets stretched out, right? Right, correct. Now, after a killing frost, same thing again, like I know with the etiolated growth that up to a week, after about a week or 10 days, we weren't seeing any injury. But it's profound. It was amazing. They just went from plants, like white plants that high, and all of a sudden something you grazed, and what the worst was if you grazed it and you got really nice weather, it tried to grow for 2 or 3 days and got a killing frost, it just burnt up every little bit of reserve it had in those roots, right? Tried to grow those 3 days and then got shut off. So it's got nothing to start in the spring until you get some leaf and some photosynthetic activity. So, but if you built a massive reserve and a massive root system, that's what's starting on in the spring. So when things, like I say, we set our plants up to be maximum growth when things are good. So like when my neighbors get here, we get here.
So you've grazed that once during the growing season already?
Once or twice, yeah. Usually just once. We're so dry oftentimes that it's a once over. Right. If we had more time, I would probably do a 10% clip and then come back around. But with 2 of us working out, and the work that I do is everything's happening at the same time, right? We're big grazing stuff at work at the same time. We're grazing home hangs at the same time. So it's hard for me to do anything more than, but that's why we rotate every 2 days. I would maybe try every day, but I'm really not a big believer in like 4, 5, 6 times a day type thing. If we all went to a buffet table, every single plate in this room would look a little bit different, right? So I think it's the same for the cattle. Like, let them eat what they want. So we go 2 days. I don't like 3. 2 I find is a balance that they're getting what they want to eat, so they're not stressed at all. I truly believe that those animals are under some stress. And when I was with CSAS, one of my last years with them, there was a study being done. The lead scientist was actually out of Brazil. One of the scientists involved was a gentleman I knew in Ireland, and the grad students from Ireland. They were looking at groups of cattle that were in small areas versus animals that were out continuous grazing. And it was that you can't measure stress every day, right? How do you do that? Like you're running a chute, you take a blood sample, there's 3 or 4 different stress hormones. What was the stress of the animal going into the chute? But there is certain stress hormones that will build up in the hair over time. So if you shave a patch of hair off that animal and then put it through some consistent management for 70 days or something, you go back and clip the hair off in that same spot. It's all new regrowth hair with the stress hormone that's present or not. What they did find out after 1 year that there was more stress hormone in the ones that were kept close together. Just because I don't think they could be, like cows don't, that's not normal. Buffalo, yes. Cows, they like to get some room, right? Yeah. So I've always believed that system, there's always a little bit of stress in those animals. And I left CSAS after that and quit traveling the world and everything, so I don't know where that ended up, but it kind of reinforced in my mind that there is more going on than just don't get me wrong, for the soil and the plants, that adaptive moving and frequent moving is great for them, but we've got the cow to consider too, and the calf, right? So we try to go 2 days. And for Quinn and I, for labor, that's important too. Then at least every second night we got more time to do some touch time. It takes a while to lose strength. So especially when you're walking through the jungles that we got. So, yeah.
One of our challenges maybe in Ontario in the fall wet weather, hoof traffic and
Yep.
damage.
Yep.
Maybe that is an experience that you have to deal with.
Yes, yeah, it was rare, but we experienced that on our very heavy clay in the Assiniboine River Valley with some swath grazing. Yeah. So what we did around that, and I don't know how frequent, like ours is not frequent, and so we get a big rainfall event, it's right around the event itself, so we would isolate them off that for a night or 2, right? But if yours is more frequent, then it becomes a real issue. Now, having said that, that's early on. Once you start building that structure, and once you start getting the infiltration and all that other stuff going on, we don't see it anymore. Like, I can get a 2-inch rain, and I don't get anywhere near the damage in that field that I did 10 years ago. Right? Because I've improved the soil structure so much. So kind of, it's a patience thing. It's kind of like seeing birds with tree club, right? You gotta wait for a while before it starts actually giving you what you want it to do. Or some other, like yellowhead alfalfa, some other, native grass species, same thing. You gotta be patient, but at some point, but yeah, there's a bit of a curve there to get going. So if it won't work for you, then fine. But if there is soils it can work on, then maybe it's an option, right? Yeah. I don't know when your period is. Like when would be the critical period for you guys? When's killing frost here? It varies.
First week in October, maybe.
First week of that early?
It varies.
Wow. Okay. We're
It's getting later, actually. Likely
Oh,
by
yeah.
October, wouldn't it?
Yeah. See, we're probably third week in October now. Yeah. Yeah. I would have bet you guys were a month later than that. So okay. Yeah. So yeah. So it may not work. I'm just saying that. But if like what but maybe there's something else you can do. Maybe there's a way you can find opportunity to feed. But like to be able to rest, if you can rest those pastures at critical times and improve your yield year on and year on and year on, then all of a sudden you're carrying more cows in the same acre, right? So it's a long-term approach, right? It's a long-term vision. It's about resiliency. I keep going back to that word. It's one that hasn't been monetized yet. Holistic got monetized, regen ag got monetized. Resiliency so far has not been monetized, and it might be a lot tougher because that's a really broad word, right? And I think it's going to be a little harder to monetize. So that's where we are. Resiliency is to me everything because we got 130, Quinn's 5th generation, 135 years this year. He doesn't want to be the last one. So we want to make sure that it's there for him and viable when we know like costs are going to keep going through the roof, right? So yeah. There's another question back here. Yeah.
So you have your soil so loose, and you have the roots,
Yeah.
and you have your field systematic. Do you ever put a plug the
What's that? Sorry, plug the.
tile drain?
We don't have tile.
Yeah, we do.
Oh, I see. You guys would have tile. Okay. So your roots would plug the tile. Ah. So would perennials would do that too, then? Eh?
Well, they could, just if you have your soil so loose and your roots, like you said,
Yeah.
you don't plug the tile.
That's possible. Yeah, I never thought of that. Like it's not. We got guys that are tiling in our part of the world, but we don't, and I hadn't even thought of anything like that. I guess that could be a real challenge, right?
Tile,
Yeah, Blake can answer that a lot better than I can.
sorry, so Blake Bentz, I'm Clayton's classmate. Tile plugging issues are not rare in this province. And they happen with annual crops as well as what Clayton's advocating for. Usually when you find tile that's plugged, it's because the tile drain has been installed with a bit of a belly. So it's usually a poor installation job. Not so much, or you've planted the crop like a radish, too high a population, and it tries to outcompete each other instead of having a larger tuber. It has really fine roots, and then it goes, because it scavenges very effectively, and then you'll find your tile is full of roots. So, usually,
Canola, there's quite a few crops.
same thing, right? So it's not just what he's advocating for, but usually it comes back to poor installation.
So a question from my end: how do you deal with that when it happens? Is there a way to deal with it?
Yeah, backhoe.
Ouch. Ouch. Yeah. We run pretty much most of them on those 2 quarters across the road. We get a little bit of grazing on the home half and that, but so we got 320 acres dedicated to those cows, and we would be there from about the middle of May till if we use Quinnsfield first, we would probably get out of there around the end of September. So May to September on that half, which in our part of the world is pretty good. So, especially seeing as most of it's sand over gravel. On a wet year, longer than that for sure, but on dry years, we still get a lot of yield on a dry year. But we've been so dry sometimes the cattle actually just shatter it when they're walking through it, and they strip the leaves off. Like we had, like the one year we had alfalfa that was 4 feet high or 50 inches high, yeah, 4 feet, and they just stripped the leaves off and ate the top, and then the grass just shattered as they were walking through. It was so hot and dry. So we lost a bit of grazing then, but I mean, what do you do? But at least we had 4 feet alfalfa to take and get something of it, right? Because the grass was a write-off. Even though it was there, it was knee high, but it was so brittle. As soon as they walked in the field, it was kind of sad to be a part of. But we get dry. Like 01 to 03, we were so dry that our grass only turned green for about 6 weeks in 2003. And that was the year they found that cow. That was a tough year. That was a tough year. We lambed 240 ewes that year on pea straw soaked with liquid mineral feed and a high-end pellet. So yeah, I forget 28 or 30 pails a day rain for 200 some ewes just to get through lambing. and then we started losing lambs in June because they were eating the pea straw and impacting on it because their rooms weren't far along to digest it. After all that money and all that cost. We spent $15,000 on pellets that year and sold $15,000 worth of lambs in Toronto. Because we lost our U.S. market, so she was quite a year. Yep.
On a dry year now, wouldn't that be worth bailing her up for hay?
No. You know what? I used to do that, to try and manage for quality. In my early days, I believe that I was better off to hay it and remove it and manage for quality. But what I was doing, I was removing nutrients and organic matter from the system, and it cost me. Now, on good land, maybe. On that poor land, big mistake. So if you're on really good land, and you could cut that for hay and then get a really nice high quality regrowth, if you're trying to get, the cows getting some barley or something on them, yeah, I think go right ahead, right? And then you got that stored hay. But then you can also run the risk of overgrazing it and then having far less. What you do this year shows up next year, right? With grazing, 100%, right? So it's a balance. But I thought I was doing some really smart things by doing that, and we saw the effect in that field for probably 5-6 years by doing that, 2 years in a row. Yeah. So lesson learned. Like I just say, you got to be a critical thinker. You keep adapting, keep learning, keep thinking outside the box, and pay attention to what you're seeing. So. Oh.
Of your 320 acres, how many acres do you have in annuals?
30 on that field. The rest is perennial. Yeah. Yeah. And the one quarter is a little bit better, but the one is really, really light. And then we got some native in there as well. It's sort of productive, sort of not. But yeah. So like for us though, it's that's a lot of cows for that length of time. A lot of guys might be 2 months, whereas we're getting May to end of September. So yeah. Yep. I think we're going to probably start fertilizing some of those pastures in dry years to get more production early on. We bought my neighbor's herd that came with some pasture as well. But we're keeping our heifers there. So whereas we would have needed some space for them as well. And if we start improving his pastures, we'll be able to keep a lot more heifers and maybe even some of the pairs over on his. So it's going to be tough, don't get me wrong. But I don't know if we can buy land. Land's $1 million a quarter where I am right now. And I don't know why. Because you can't even come close to paying the interest on it at that, even with the guys with the grain. But that's what it's going for. There's a quarter just on auction right next door to me was $1 million here just a month ago. So you try to pencil up cattle on that, it doesn't even come close. So I'm not sure what we're going to do. There's a lot of older guys getting out. We might be able to rent some. So yeah, but we bought a neighbor's cow herd and his pasture that he left it in. Because he was on you guys got some, well, I'm not sure maybe you're here or not, but there's groups like in Manitoba, maybe in Ontario, where they pay you to keep your pasture in, even if you get out of cattle. There's like you put easements and everything on, so his pastures have to stay intact. So we by buying his cows, we had access to his pasture, yeah. So, and if we happen to buy another neighbor's herd, we got some other ones that are thinking of selling out and everything, and that's kind of might be our next expansion. There might be some pasture land come with them too, but we're thinking about. We think we need to know. We know we need to fertilize a little bit because our sulfur's low, and if you got, I'm sure sulfur's one of the really important ones for fixation, right? So we're likely not fixing anywhere near as much in as we should be, which again would really bump our pasture yields without having to fertilize with N, which is incredible. I don't know where sulfur's at this year, but N, Blake was telling me it's not good. But if we fertilize, the wet years we're fine, but if we start fertilizing the dry years, my concern there would be that I artificially trick those plants into keeping their roots shallow by starting to add fertilizer to the system, right? Because they don't need to go looking for anything. And all what we're doing, everything good we're doing right now, to get those deep roots and everything that's working for us, we might be taking a step backward. And I'm struggling with that, actually, quite a bit, as how much is too much fertilizer? And I don't know if there's a good answer for it. But it's in my mind for sure. But I think sulfur has to be, I'm pretty sure it has to be something we have to look at.
Do your brassicas still put up yellow flowers?
We don't use brassicas. And we got so many flea beetles, like we have them work in the mixes that Mary Jane gets, and they're basically, leaves are 3/4 gone. So when photosynthesis is driving everything, it just doesn't work. And they haven't got a mycorrhizal link either, so which, I mean, there's good and bad, because apparently, from what I understand with some of the researchers, they really do attract some very good bacteria. But the mycorrhizal link is a bit of a miss for me, but the fact that the leaves are just shredded with flea beetles, and as soon as guys swap it, and we're yellow all around us, like there's canola, like we're not as bad as Alberta, because Alberta used to be canola, still canola, that was their rotation for, and they wonder why they got club root. But we're basically canola wheat. A lot of guys, there's a bit of beans showing up, but canola wheat, some guys back. And as soon as they swap the canola, flea beetles just start moving into everything else they got. And if you got brassicas in your cover crops, they're gone. So you pay money for seed that you just couldn't get anything out of. But you know, if they would work for us, then we'd probably try them. I just don't think we can. I got canola beside me just about every year. Yeah, and even with the predatory insects, I don't think that the flea beetles are so overwhelming with the canola populations in Manitoba. It's unbelievable. Like a lot of the chemicals aren't working. The guys, I'm not sure what they're going to do. Seeding twice now, which is 800 and some bucks a bag, whatever it is. Yeah. Yep.
Are you moving in the morning or the evening?
Evening. Yeah. Just because it's easier for us. Yeah. And I mean, anybody that's moved cattle, it's easy. Like as long as your next string is set up, as soon as they see you, they know what's going on. You walk to the end you're going to move it from, and that's always the end you put the reel at. You walk out, we use the wire clips, right? Unclip it, reel up to the first fence post, they all go around you, and you get a real good look if anything's limping or anything's doing this or anybody's hanging back. Run the reel back up and away you go, and then the next night or whenever you set the next string up, and like once they get onto it, moving cattle is really easy. It's a lot of walking, but I'm still young enough and the kid doesn't mind. He's thinking side by sides in the future for us. So.
What do you want your pasture to look like when you start grazing this spring?
Well, when we start grazing in the spring, it's likely 6 to 8 inches high, and there's a lot of dead material in it. So, but we still feed dry hay to transition them from the dry feed. We don't feed silage or anything, so the rumen isn't used to a wet feed, right? If we did, it'd be a little bit different story. But when I was in Argentina in 2008, Annabelle, he was one of their leading scientists, and once we had an idea what was going on, I said, I'm going to go ride with him for a day and a half. And that's when him and I became really good friends. We started finishing each other's sentences, whatever. And he is adamant that the first thing you manage in grazing is moisture. So if you have a high moisture forage in the spring, you need to give that animal a dry feed. And I said, oh yeah, we do that. I said, we actually take a little bit of straw once in a while. He said, straw? What are you doing that for? I said, well, you just told me I didn't need dry feed. He said, yeah, but you want them to gain, don't you? Yeah, take out the best hay you got. Actually, that's a pretty good point. I guess that's why I'm riding with you, right? And we've done that ever since. And I mean, you let cattle out in the spring after being in dry feed all winter, and they go to that lush pasture. If you haven't got any deadfall in or anything, and you know you can't catch them when you're in a strainer, right? And that's when the cattle when you're is that loose, it's digestive upset. One of my colleagues in CSAS, he called it microbial dysbiosis, and I love that term because that's what it is. Your rumen biology is way out of whack because of the moisture. And Annabelle was adamant that anything over 82% moisture, so 17 to 18% dry matter, anything over that is a real problem. And you see those cattle lose condition, they don't milk as well, the calves are going to pieces. So find a way to get some dry feed up to them until your pasture starts to advance physiologically or dry down a bit. And I mean, in a wet environment here, if you guys get more rain, it may take your pastures a lot longer to dry down. Ours dry down fairly quickly. So 2-3 weeks, we just take a few bales over. And we try, it's a low protein bale, right? Like it'll be a green feed or something like that. Still very good, but we don't want the protein because we got lots in the green stuff, right? We're already high in protein. So, and it's all about managing that shift, that transition, right? And it's about resiliency, right? Like, you know, put all that feed into her in the wintertime and expensive hay, and then lose it all in 3 weeks on grass because it's so lush. You know, washy is what they call it in the Dakotas, right? Washy grass. But I asked the question when I was in the UK and Ireland, and I said, like, what do you guys do when it's that wet? And they said, well, what do you mean? We don't have a problem. But it's because they're wet all the time. The rumen adapts, right? The rumen can adapt, but it takes 6 weeks. If you're doing any feeding trials with anybody involved in research and feeding trials or anything, it takes 6 weeks to adapt the rumen to the feed you want to be measuring what's going on, right? So a 3-week period where you got wet, lush forests, your rumen doesn't have a chance to adapt in our environment. So how do you manage that? And rolling out dry hay, yeah, it's a bit of a pain in the ass, but you know, if it keeps your calves growing and your cows looking good, especially if you're trying to breed, you know, we've had a lot of open cows in the prairies the last few years, and some of it's been the drought, some of it I think is that. And some of it has been, guys have been baling and cutting and everything, because I think we had a lot of issues where we were cheating up a lot of the elements of time of copper. And we were short, we had a lot of herds showing up short of copper with blood tests. When a blood test is low in copper, you're real bad, because copper's stored in the liver. So we knew we had copper issues amongst other things, but now guys are really improved their mineral programs, and we've got this multi-min shot. But one of the things we've seen with the multi-min is lots more twins. We give a multi-min shot before breeding now. And I had a set of twins already this year. We already started calving. We used to get a set every 3 years. We had 4 or 5 last year out of 100 cows. Like, it's just, but you know what? They're worth $1,500 right now. We sell them right off the bat, so you got beer money right away. But it's the multi-mins really helped. Our opens went way down, and everybody said the same thing. Their opens have gone way down with the multi-min shots. It's $700 a bottle, but we bought 3 bottles. It was $2,000. The vet said, "Boy, it's a lot of money, Clayton." I said, "One open cow. I got to have one less open cow." And I paid for that multi-min, beyond what it might be doing other things. And we probably had 5 less open cows. So sometimes you spend money to make money. Sometimes you save money to make money. It's just the question is trying to figure out when, right? That's always the ultimate goal of farming, is trying to figure out what to do at the right time. So,
One more burning question. Who's got it?
Again, I'm sorry I threw a lot at you, but like you said, there is a lot to it. And if, like, Tim's got the presentation, my report or whatever, take my card if you want, and email me, do whatever. But I hope you got something out of it tonight. Like I can tell, my gears are always turning, and there's a lot to learn in this, and there's a lot to keep going forward. I think yet we got a lot to learn. So, but thanks very much for your time, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Clayton. Lots of information there. Certainly a different, we're only a province away, but certainly different climate conditions than we have. But certainly what I got out of it is being resilient. We all have our own resiliency in each of our farms of what we do and how to adapt. And certainly Clayton's learned that on his operation. I think that's a take-home is being resilient in our own, and learn a little bits and pieces of what Clayton has done, and learn from each other here. There's a whole wealth of information here, so certainly that. And it's interesting as I sit up here and I see 2 ladies up the front, and they're just knitting away. They're watching Clayton, and they've knitted a whole blanket here, both of them. It's interesting that they're not even looking in the way they go, so that's pretty cool outfits they're making. But anyway, I thought it was good. Clayton mentioned the quiet weans. I know a business that sells them. We use them. A great way to wean calves is the quiet weans. They don't, not 100% stay on, but if you can get out of 60 calves, and we had 5 fall out in 5 days, you still have a lot more quieter weaning at the time of weaning, and you wash them up, you reuse them the next year. So they work really well, but just a business just out of town.
And those five don't bellow for 3 days. Like they quit bellowing because the other 55 aren't.
Yeah.
They quit a lot earlier, so even they are better. Yeah.
A lot
But they're not
quieter.
foolproof. Yeah.
Just another great thing. He mentioned talking about marbling. Wagyu cows, you gotta get into Wagyu cows. Don't know if anybody has any around here, but check them out. CrazyMeadowsWagyu.com. Sorry. Grazing magazines. I don't know if anybody's heard of the Stockman Grass Farmer. Still out there. I've got it since before 2009, and I've gone through them over the years. I'm now, and Graze is another magazine. I have some to give away, and I'll be giving them away over the years. If anybody wants any, take them. Don't take them all. Take one, and I'll have them at each of the events, and just cleaning out some closets that I'm not likely going to read them again. But not that I'm full of knowledge, but just pass the knowledge on to you guys. Virtual fence. We're the Ontario dealer for virtual fence. Few folks in the room are using it, so it's exactly what it is. It's just like a dog fence, except for cattle. Contains your cattle without a physical fence. Still need a perimeter, but great way to subdivide and move your cattle, and works great. So, need any more information? See Alicia or Melissa at our store on the virtual fence. One more thing, just mention again, Lois Sinclair from Ontario Soil and Crop. Anybody who's applied for that funding, just go and get your name registered in case your application gets approved, and then you already have this knowledge sharing event that you need to qualify for the funding. Reminder, Summer Pasture Walk, June 3rd. If you register, we'll send you a reminder out, but anything else, Melissa, that I forgot? I think I have it all. Thank you once again for coming out. Clayton will be here for a while more, and yeah, thanks again.